The year was 1895, and the hills of northern Arkansas carried a strange quiet at dusk, the kind that made you feel like the world was holding its breath. Along a crooked dirt road, where wagon wheels left deep scars in the clay, stood a wooden building with a sagging roof and a hand-painted sign that read, Hollow Creek Tavern, Music, Ale, and Good Company. Locals said the tavern was unlike any other on the frontier. It wasn't the whiskey or the stew that made people come from miles away. It was the music. They said when the sun dipped below the horizon and lanterns began to glow, the piano inside would start to play on its own. The melody wasn't eerie but gentle, like a lullaby played by invisible hands. And those who listened long enough swore they heard the voices of the departed, loved ones gone too soon, whispering through the chords. One autumn evening, a dusty stranger rode into Hollow Creek. His name was Elias Boone, a widower and former carpenter from Missouri, drawn by rumors he'd overheard at a trading post, that there was a tavern where the dead spoke through song. Elias wasn't a man who believed in spirits. He believed in work, in grief that could be buried, and in the silence that follows loss. But ever since his wife Margaret had passed the previous winter, sleep had become a cruel visitor. When he stepped inside the tavern, warm light spilled over him. The place smelled of wood smoke, stew, and tobacco. Behind the counter stood Clara Wren, the tavernkeeper, a woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much. "Evening, stranger," she greeted with a kind smile. "You look like a man with a story." Elias nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe I came to hear one." Clara poured him a drink and gestured toward the upright piano in the corner. Its keys were yellowed, and its wood bore scratches as if it had lived 100 lifetimes. "No one plays it," she said softly. "Not since my husband passed. But sometimes it plays for us." Elias frowned. "Plays for you?" She nodded, her voice dropping to a whisper. "When someone sits in this tavern with a heart full of longing, it answers." That night, as the last patrons drifted out, Elias stayed behind. The tavern grew still, save for the crackle of the fire. Then a single note rang out from the piano. One, then another. The tune grew, slow, mournful, and achingly familiar. Elias's hand trembled. It was Margaret's song, the lullaby she used to hum while mending his shirts by the fire. He sank to his knees, tears blurring his vision. Maggie? But there was no answer, only music. When morning came, Clara found Elias still sitting near the piano, hollow-eyed and shaken. "You heard it, didn't you?" she said quietly. He nodded. It was her. "I swear it." Clara poured him black coffee and sat across from him. "This tavern was built on old ground. My husband Thomas was a carpenter, like you. He said the land was special, said it hummed when he laid the foundation. After he passed, the piano began to play by itself." She looked toward it with reverence. "Some say it's cursed. I say it's a gift." Elias didn't know what to think. But that night, as the sun set again, more travelers came. A farmer who'd lost his son, a woman mourning her brother, an old soldier haunted by comrades long gone, and as each told their story, the piano began to play. It became a ritual. Each evening Clara would dim the lamps, and the tavern would fill with quiet souls carrying unseen burdens. Then, without fail, the first note would echo, and the air would thicken with memory. Sometimes it was a gentle fiddle tune, other times a hymn, or a child's laughter woven through the chords. The visitors didn't speak, they listened, and in that listening, grief softened into something beautiful. Elias began helping around the tavern, fixing chairs and repairing windows. He no longer felt like a visitor, He felt like the tavern itself had chosen him, but he couldn't shake one question. Why him? Why had the piano called his wife's song? One stormy night, a new guest arrived, a tall man with a coal-black coat and a strange, unblinking stare. He introduced himself only as Mr. Calloway, claiming to be a musician studying frontier folklore. Clara welcomed him, though something about his presence chilled the room. When he saw the piano, he smiled. "I've heard of this place," he said. "They say your tavern bridges the living and the dead." Elias stiffened. "It's not a trick, if that's what you're implying." Calloway chuckled. "Oh, I don't think it's a trick. I think it's a doorway. And every doorway can be opened. Wider. That night, when the piano began to play, the tune was wrong, darker, faster, desperate. The windows rattled, the flames flickered blue. And for the first time, Clara looked afraid. The next morning, silence hung over the tavern like a curse. The piano's keys were cracked, and the floorboards beneath it seemed warped, as if something had pressed up from below. Clara confronted Mr. Calloway, but he only smirked. "I simply wanted to see what happens when grief becomes hunger." "What did you do?" Elias demanded. "I played back," Calloway said. "The dead listen too, you know. And when you invite them, not all of them are kind." That night the piano played again, but this time the music came from beneath the floor. The tavern trembled. Patrons fled. Clara and Elias stood frozen as the final notes faded into silence. Days passed. No one came to Hollow Creek Tavern anymore. The air smelled of dust and fear. Elias thought about leaving, but something kept him there. Then one night, while patching a broken wallboard, he heard a faint voice. "Elias." It was Margaret's voice, tender and distant. He pressed his ear to the wall. "Maggie? Where are you?" "Below," she whispered. The music opened the way. "But it's closing now." Elias rushed to Clara. "She's trapped. We have to do something." Clara's face went pale. "Then we'll do what the tavern asks of us. We'll play." Clara and Elias lit every lantern in the tavern. The piano sat silent, waiting. "Play her song," Clara said, "but let your heart lead, not your grief." Elias hesitated, then sat at the keys. His hands shook as he pressed the first notes of Margaret's lullaby. The sound was uneven, but pure. The tavern began to tremble again, not in terror this time, but in harmony. The air filled with warmth and golden light. From the floor rose faint shapes, silhouettes of men and women, transparent and shimmering. Among them, Elias saw her, Margaret, smiling softly. "You came for me," she whispered. "I never stopped listening," he said through tears. As the final note lingered, Margaret stepped closer, her form fading like morning mist. "You can't stay here, Elias," she said gently. "The living aren't meant to dwell where songs don't end." He reached for her, but his hand passed through. "I don't want to lose you again." "You won't," she replied. "Every time someone loves, every time they remember, the music plays on." With that, she was gone. The piano closed its lid softly. The lanterns flickered out, and in the stillness that followed, Clara placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. "She's at peace," she said. "Now let's make sure others find the same." And so they did, turning Hollow Creek Tavern into a refuge not for the haunted, but for the healing. From that day forward, whenever the wind passed through the Arkansas hills, locals swore they heard faint music drifting through the pines, not sorrowful, but full of hope. After that night, Hollow Creek Tavern stood still for nearly a week. No music, no guests, no ghostly whispers. Elias would sit by the hearth each evening, half expecting the piano to awaken again, but all it gave him was silence, deep, honest silence. Clara watched him closely. "Sometimes," she said, Miracles leave behind quiet, so we can decide what to do with it. He nodded. Then let's fill it with something good. So they reopened the tavern. But this time, they didn't promise ghost songs or visitations from the dead. They promised warmth, comfort, and remembrance. The sign outside was repainted to read, Hollow Creek Tavern, for the living and those we carry with us. Weeks later, a widow named Marjorie Lane arrived by wagon. She'd lost her son to fever and heard whispers that Hollow Creek could make the heart hear again. Clara told her gently, "We don't call the dead anymore, ma'am, but you're welcome to sit, eat, and rest." Marjorie nodded and sat near the piano anyway. As she sipped her coffee, the faintest hum began to fill the room, not from the keys, but from the strings within. A soft lullaby emerged, one that any mother would know. Marjorie began to cry quietly, and Elias joined her at the table. He said, "It's not the dead calling back. It's love reminding you it never left." That night, when she left, she pressed a silver locket into his hand. "For the tavern," she said, "so others can find what I found, peace." As winter came, a traveling fiddler named Jeremiah Pike stopped by. He was blind, his eyes cloudy like morning frost, but he played with haunting beauty. He said he'd followed the sound of a piano through the woods, though no one had been playing. That night, when he joined in with the tavern's piano, something remarkable happened. The piano followed him, echoing, weaving around his notes, as though the two instruments spoke a language older than grief itself. When he finished, Jeremiah smiled. "That's not music from the dead," he said. "That's heaven's way of saying, you're not done living." He left at dawn, never to be seen again, but every now and then travelers swore they heard a fiddle on the breeze outside Hollow Creek. One spring night, lightning struck the pine ridge. Flames raced toward the tavern like a living thing. Elias and Clara fought it with buckets and blankets, but when the wind shifted, fire caught the roof. Inside, the piano began to tremble, its strings humming violently. Elias shouted over the crackling wood, "We have to save it." Clara grabbed his arm. "No, save yourself." But Elias ran inside. Smoke blinded him, and heat seared his hands. Through the haze, the piano's lid lifted slightly, and from within came Margaret's voice, faint but clear. "Let it go, Elias. You've already saved me." He hesitated, tears burning more than the smoke, then staggered back outside. Moments later, the roof collapsed. The tavern, and its mysterious piano, were gone. When morning came, all that remained was a foundation of stone and blackened beams. Clara wept quietly beside Elias. "It was our home," she said. He placed a soot-covered hand on her shoulder. "It still is. It just changed its shape." As they sifted through the ashes, Elias found something half-buried. The piano's brass plate, still warm, engraved with the maker's mark, Thomas Wren, 1862, Music for the Soul. Clara gasped. Thomas made this piano himself. He must have built it with love strong enough to outlive death. They decided then and there to rebuild. Not a tavern of ghost songs, but a hall of remembrance, where travelers could come to share stories and heal through fellowship. Throughout the summer of 1896, word spread that Hollow Creek would rise again. Farmers, carpenters, and travelers who had once found solace there returned to help. They brought lumber, nails, food, and laughter. Elias guided them with steady hands, his grief finally tempered into purpose. One evening, while Clara watched the sunset, she said, "It's strange, isn't it? How loss can build something stronger than we ever had." Elias smiled faintly. "The dead don't leave holes, Clara. They leave blueprints." By autumn, the tavern stood proud again. New wood, new walls, but the same heartbeat of kindness within. And though no piano remained, The building itself seemed to hum softly at night, as if remembering the songs once played there. One afternoon, a little boy named Sammy Keller wandered in. He was deaf since birth, but his parents said he loved to feel vibrations in the ground when people played music nearby. He sat cross-legged on the tavern floor while Elias told stories of the singing wood and the old piano that used to comfort the lonely. When Elias spoke, Sammy placed his palm on the floorboards, and his eyes widened. He smiled and began to hum tunelessly, a sound of pure joy. Clara knelt beside him. "What do you hear, sweetheart?" He tapped his chest. "Warm music," he signed. "From below." Elias and Clara exchanged a look. They both felt it too. A gentle vibration through the floor, like a heartbeat. The tavern, it seemed, still played for those who listened with their hearts. Years later, when Elias's beard had turned white, a familiar figure appeared at the door, Mr. Calloway. But time had humbled him. His hair was gray, and his eyes held regret instead of arrogance. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "I thought the tavern drew its power from death. I see now. It was life all along." Elias studied him for a long moment. "You came for forgiveness?" Calloway nodded. "If you'll have it." Elias motioned him inside. "Then stay a while. There's always room for another soul trying to do better." That night, Calloway played a gentle tune on a borrowed violin, one of hope, not sorrow. And as he did, faint music joined him from nowhere. Soft, familiar, forgiving. When he finished, tears ran down his face. "They forgave me," he whispered. Elias smiled. "They always do, when you learn to listen." The winter of 1902 was cruel. Snow fell in thick silence, blanketing the tavern and the hills. Elias sat by the fire, weaker now, but at peace. Clara sat beside him, holding his hand. "Promise me," he said softly, "when I'm gone, keep the tavern open. Let it sing, not for me, but for everyone who needs it." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "You have my word." That night, Elias drifted to sleep and never woke again. But as dawn broke, the tavern filled with a golden light. And from beneath the floorboards came a melody no one had ever heard before. Gentle, joyful, complete. Clara listened, smiling through tears. "The music found him," she whispered. Years turned into decades. The tavern became a landmark of quiet miracles, a place where travelers came not for ale or song, but for peace. By 1930, it was known simply as the Listening Tavern. No one could explain why its walls seemed to hum when the wind blew, or why people claimed to hear faint lullabies while falling asleep there. Some said it was the ghost of those who'd found rest. Others said it was the sound of memory, echoing through woods soaked with love. Long after Clara passed, a plaque was nailed to the rebuilt wall, in memory of Elias Boone and Clara Wren. They taught us that music isn't what we hear, it's what we remember. And on quiet nights, even now, locals say that if you stand beneath the old pine ridge, you can still hear the faint tune of a piano carried by the wind, a melody not of the departed, but of the love that never leaves.